Speak and live as if the deepest authority is already seated within you, not above you, not outside you, not waiting in judgment somewhere beyond the sky, but alive in your conscience, your awareness, your capacity to choose truth over comfort. When you act as if the sacred center lives inside you, your posture changes. Your decisions gain weight. Your smallest promises become vows, and your private thoughts become prayers in motion. Most people behave as if they are empty vessels waiting to be approved, filled, or commanded. That is why they drift. But when you assume that a divine spark is already present within your psyche, you stop negotiating with your own cowardice. You begin to ask better questions. Is this action worthy of the highest within me? Would I still choose this if my inner judge were fully awake? To live this way is not arrogance, it is responsibility. It means you can no longer pretend you are powerless. You cannot blame fate while ignoring your choices. You cannot claim ignorance while silencing your intuition. The inner voice becomes your compass, and discipline becomes a form of reverence. When you speak, speak as if your words shape reality, because they shape character, and character shapes destiny. When you work, work as if your effort participates in creation itself, because every ordered act pushes back chaos. When you face fear, face it as a guardian at the threshold, not an enemy, but a test asking whether you are ready to grow larger than your past. You do not need constant signs. The signal is already inside you. Your unease when you lie, your expansion when you tell the truth, your quiet strength when you choose what is right over what is easy. Treat that signal as sacred data. Follow it consistently, and your life organizes itself around meaning rather than impulse. Walk into each day as a bearer of inner authority. Stand upright in your decisions. Clean your motives. Sharpen your awareness. If the highest presence lived within you, how carefully would you act? How honestly would you speak? How courageously would you choose to live that answer? With the belief that the highest moral authority lives within your conscience, and your entire inner architecture begins to reorganize. You stop performing goodness for approval and begin practicing it as alignment. The question shifts from, how will this look? To, is this true? Conscience becomes less like a rule book and more like an inner instrument that vibrates when you move toward integrity and tightens when you drift away from it. This requires listening, not to impulse, not to fear, not to desired rest as justification, but to the quiet, steady signal beneath emotional noise. When you treat conscience as the highest authority, excuses lose their persuasive power. Rationalizations appear thinner. You notice how easily the mind manufactures permission for what the deeper self rejects. In that moment of tension between what is convenient and what is right, you discover your real center of command. Each time you obey the deeper signal, you strengthen it. Each time you betray it, you blur it. Over time, people either become internally guided or externally driven, and the difference shows in the texture of their character. Living this way demands inner honesty. You must observe your motives with precision. Generosity can hide a hunger for praise. Courage can hide a desire for dominance. Kindness can hide avoidance of conflict. Conscience asks you to refine intention, not just behavior. It is not satisfied with appearances. It presses for alignment between inner truth and outer act. That pressure is not cruelty. It is craftsmanship. It shapes the self into something structurally sound. You begin to experience guilt differently under this belief. It is no longer a social emotion triggered by disapproval, but an internal feedback signal indicating misalignment. Instead of suppressing it or dramatizing it, you study it. You ask what value was violated, what truth was ignored, what fear took control. In this way, mistakes become instruction rather than identity. Conscience becomes a teacher rather than a judge. Trusting inner moral authority also changes how you relate to power. You are less easily intimidated by loud voices or popular opinion because your reference point is inward. You do not rebel automatically, nor do you submit automatically. You evaluate. This evaluation is not cold calculation, it is ethical perception. You sense when something is off, even if it is widely accepted. That perception gives you the strength to stand alone when necessary and to stand corrected when proven wrong. To live from conscience requires regular inner silence. Without reflection, its voice is drowned by stimulation and urgency. You must create moments where you review your day, your reactions, your speech, your compromises, not with harshness, but with clarity. This ongoing dialogue with yourself builds inner authority the way repeated use builds muscle. Gradually, decisions become cleaner. Speech becomes more deliberate. Action becomes more grounded. You discover that self-respect is not built from achievement, but from obedience to what you know is right. And once that respect is earned internally, it cannot be easily taken away by external judgment. Treat your choices and words as sacred responsibilities, not casual reactions, and you transform daily life from automatic movement into deliberate creation. Most harm is not born from evil intent, but from unconscious speech and impulsive decision. A careless sentence can wound deeper than a planned insult. A rushed choice can redirect years. When you begin to regard each word and decision as carrying moral and psychological weight, awareness steps in where habit once ruled. The reaction is fast, emotional, and often borrowed from past wounds. A responsible choice is slower, examined, and aligned with inner order. The gap between stimulus and response is where dignity lies. If you do not guard that gap, your past will speak for you, your fears, your resentments, your unexamined assumptions. But if you pause, even briefly, you allow consciousness to enter. That pause is not weakness, it is mastery over inner chaos. Words are not merely sounds used to transfer information. They are carriers of intent and shapers of reality. They build trust or erode it. They clarify or distort perception. Spoken repeatedly, they become identity, both yours and others. When you speak carelessly, you scatter psychic energy. When you speak precisely, you gather it. Precision does not mean stiffness, it means alignment between what you see, what you mean, and what you say. Such speech has gravity. People feel it even if they cannot explain it. To treat speech as sacred responsibility is to resist exaggeration, gossip, and emotional discharge disguised as honesty. Not every feeling deserves immediate expression. Some emotions must be understood before they are communicated. Otherwise, you hand raw fire to another person and call it truth. Responsible speech is filtered through reflection. Is it accurate? Is it necessary? Is it the right time? Is my motive clear? This inner questioning refines expression without silencing authenticity. The same principle applies to choice. Every decision is a vote cast for the type of person you are becoming. Small choices accumulate into character. Repeated shortcuts train the mind toward avoidance. Repeated acts of courage train it toward strength. When choices are treated casually, life fragments into contradictions, values declared but not lived. When choices are treated as sacred, alignment emerges between belief and behavior. Responsibility does not mean heaviness, it means reverence. You are not meant to become tense and fearful about every move, but awake within it. There is a difference between rigidity and conscious care. One is driven by anxiety, the other by respect for consequence. Responsible action actually reduces anxiety because it replaces regret with clarity. Over time, this practice reshapes relationships. Others learn that your words can be trusted because they are not thrown impulsively. Your agreements hold weight because they are not made lightly. Your refusals are respected because they are not defensive reactions but considered boundaries. This consistency creates psychological stability around you. You begin to notice that when words and choices are honored, inner conflict decreases. Energy previously spent repairing damage is now available for creation, learning, and deeper connection. Life feels less like a series of collisions and more like a crafted path shaped by conscious participation rather than emotional reflex. Stop outsourcing power. Inner guidance must replace constant external validation, because a life directed by applause will eventually be ruled by fear. When your sense of direction depends on approval, you hand your steering wheel to the crowd. Their moods become your weather. Their opinions become your law. You begin to measure truth by reaction rather than by alignment. And in doing so, you slowly lose contact with your own inner compass. External validation is not evil, but it is unstable. Shifts with trends, personalities, and hidden agendas. What is praised today is dismissed tomorrow. If your identity is built on that moving ground, you will live in continuous adjustment. reshaping yourself to fit expectations you did not consciously choose. This produces a subtle inner fracture, a split between the performed self and the actual self. The cost of that split is chronic tension and quiet resentment. Inner guidance operates differently. It is quieter, slower, and often inconvenient. It does not shout, it signals. It appears as a persistent sense of rightness or wrongness, expansion or contraction, clarity or unease. Many ignore it at first because it rarely promises immediate reward. It asks for alignment before recognition, discipline before applause, truth before comfort. Yet it is the only guidance system that remains with you when the crowd disappears. To reclaim inner authority, you must learn to tolerate disapproval. This is the hidden initiation. The nervous system must be trained to endure not being liked, not being understood, not being instantly affirmed. Otherwise, you will keep abandoning your deeper knowing to purchase temporary acceptance. Each time you override your inner signal for approval, you weaken your self-trust. Each time you honor it despite pressure, you strengthen psychological backbone. Constant validation seeking also distorts perception. You begin to ask, how will this be received? Before you ask, is this true? That reversal corrupts judgment. It encourages safe dishonesty and discouraged authenticity. Creativity narrows. Courage hesitates. Even morality becomes performative, chosen for visibility rather than conviction. Inner guidance restores correct order, truth first, reception second. Developing inner guidance requires practices of self-contact, reflection, solitude, deliberate journaling, and honest self-questioning are not luxuries but calibration tools. Without them, you cannot distinguish intuition from impulse or fear from wisdom. You must study your own reactions and patterns until you recognize the texture of your authentic signal. It has a different feel than anxiety and a different tone than desire. It is steady rather than urgent. There is also responsibility in this shift. When you stop outsourcing power, you lose the right to blame others for your direction. You cannot say you were merely following pressure. You become accountable for your path. While heavier at first, this responsibility produces strength. Decisions become cleaner because they are owned. Regret becomes instructive rather than bitter. As inner validation grows, external praise becomes a supplement, not a necessity. Criticism becomes information, not devastation. You listen, evaluate, and adjust without surrendering your center. Your worth is no longer negotiated in public, it is established in private alignment. From that position, action carries a different force, not the nervous energy of performance, but the grounded energy of conviction. Responsibility, not ego, is the true sign of inner divinity awareness because ego seeks elevation while responsibility accepts weight. Ego asks to be seen as great. Responsibility asks to become trustworthy. One is concerned with image, the other with impact. When a person becomes aware of a higher principle within themselves, their first transformation is not louder self-assertion, but deeper accountability. They become careful with influence, precise with speech, and deliberate with action because they sense that their choices participate in something larger than personal gain. Ego expands through comparison. It needs witnesses, rivals, and constant measurement. Feeds on superiority or collapses into inferiority. Both are forms of self-obsession. Responsibility, by contrast, expands through service to truth and reality. It does not ask, how do I appear, but what is required of me here? This shift changes motivation at the root. Work becomes an offering of order rather than a performance for admiration. Discipline becomes devotion to alignment rather than a strategy for status. Inner divinity awareness expresses itself as stewardship. A steward protects, maintains, and improves what is entrusted to them. When you feel that consciousness, talent, and moral choice are sacred trusts rather than personal possessions, your behavior matures. You waste less time in vanity and more time in refinement. You stop dramatizing your uniqueness and start developing your usefulness. There is humility in this, but it is not self-belittlement, it is accurate scale. You are significant enough to be accountable, not grand enough to be exempt. Ego resists burden and seeks exception. It wants reward without sacrifice and authority without obligation. Responsibility accepts that privilege and duty are twins. If you have influence, you must exercise restraint. If you have insight, you must practice honesty. If you have strength, you must develop control. This acceptance produces gravity in the personality. Others experience it as reliability. You become someone whose presence reduces chaos rather than amplifies it. There is also a psychological difference in how ego and responsibility handle error. Ego defends itself against being wrong because its identity is fragile. It hides, blames, or distorts facts to preserve appearance. Responsibility moves toward error. To repair it, it can admit fault without collapsing because its identity is anchored in alignment, not perfection. Correction becomes part of growth rather than a threat to worth. This capacity to self-correct is one of the clearest markers of inner spiritual maturity. Responsibility also disciplines desire. Not every impulse is obeyed, not every emotion is expressed, not every opportunity is taken. There is an inner governor that asks whether action is justified, timely, and clean in motive. This restraint is often misunderstood as suppression, but in truth it is integration. Energy is directed, not denied. Power is channeled, not scattered. As responsibility deepens, a quiet authority appears. It does not need to announce itself. It is felt in consistency, fairness, and follow-through. Such authority does not dominate, it stabilizes. It does not inflate the self, it orders the self. And from that ordered center, action carries a quality that feels grounded, ethical, and deeply awake. Fear and discomfort are growth thresholds, not signals to retreat, because every expansion of capacity first appears as instability. The nervous system interprets unfamiliar demand as danger, even when the situation is developmental rather than destructive. This is why meaningful change so often feels wrong before it feels right. The body tightens, the mind produces doubt, and imagination predicts failure. If you mistake these reactions for accurate warnings instead of adaptive resistance, you will repeatedly turn back at the very edge of transformation. Comfort maintains what already exists. Growth reorganizes it. That reorganization produces friction. Old habits lose authority. Familiar identities weaken, and predictable outcomes disappear. The psyche prefers the known, even when the known is limiting, because predictability feels like safety. To cross a threshold, you must be willing to experience temporary psychological disorder in service of higher order. This is not recklessness, it is developmental courage. The decision to tolerate short-term instability for long-term enlargement. Fear is often treated as an enemy, but it is more accurately a border guard. It stands at the edge of your current self-definition and challenges entry into a larger one. It asks whether you are prepared to update your identity, your skill, your discipline. When you approach something that matters, honest confrontation, creative exposure, leadership, emotional vulnerability, fear intensifies because the stakes are real. The presence of fear in these moments is not proof you should withdraw. It is proof that meaning is involved. Discomfort also exposes dependency patterns. You discover how much you rely on approval, certainty, control, or avoidance. When those supports are threatened, discomfort rises. If you automatically escape it, the dependency remains invisible and unchallenged. You stay present. You gain diagnostic information about your attachments and limits. Discomfort becomes a teacher, revealing where strengthening is required. Enduring it consciously builds tolerance, and tolerance builds range. There is an important distinction between harmful danger and developmental strain. Growth strain is proportional, purposeful, and recoverable. It stretches but does not shatter. Learning to tell the difference requires self-observation. Harmful danger degrades your integrity and health. Developmental strain demands effort and courage while increasing your capacity. Without accepting strain, potential remains theoretical. Ability is forged where effort meets resistance. Avoidance trains fear to grow. Each retreat confirms the brain as prediction that the situation was too much. The boundary then moves inward and your world becomes smaller. Approach, even in small increments, trains fear to recalibrate. The boundary moves outward. Mastery is rarely achieved through one dramatic leap. It is built through repeated, voluntary contact with manageable discomfort. Each contact rewrites expectation and increases internal authority. Meaningful pursuits rarely feel smooth at the beginning. The early stages of truth-telling feel awkward. Discipline feels restrictive. Creative work feels exposed. And leadership feels lonely. If you require comfort as permission, you will abandon these paths too soon. If you reinterpret discomfort as initiation, persistence becomes possible. On the far side of endured fear is not merely success but self-trust. You learn that anxiety can be felt without being obeyed, that uncertainty can be entered without collapse, and that identity can expand without disintegration. This knowledge changes how you meet the next threshold, and the one after that. Align daily actions with your deepest truth to build a meaningful, ordered life, because disorder rarely begins with catastrophe. It begins with small, repeated misalignments. Each time you act against what you know is right, even in minor ways, you introduce inner friction. That friction accumulates as confusion, fatigue, and quiet self-distrust. Conversely, when action and inner knowing match, energy gathers instead of leaking. Life feels less scattered because your behavior is no longer negotiating against your conscience. Deepest truth is not a slogan or mood. It is the stable layer of knowing beneath impulse and social pressure. It includes your core values, your honest priorities, and your recognized responsibilities. Accessing it requires reflection and self-confrontation. You must ask uncomfortable questions. What do I actually believe? Not what is fashionable to believe. What do I know I should be doing that I keep postponing? Where am I pretending not to know? These questions clear distortion and bring inner truth into conscious language. Daily alignment is practical, not dramatic. It shows in schedules, habits, tone of voice, and follow-through. Grand declarations mean little if your hours contradict them. If truth matters, you tell it in small conversations, not only large ones. If growth matters, you practice it on ordinary days, not only crisis days. Repetition is what turns sincerity into structure. Structure is what turns intention into character. There is a cost to alignment. You will disappoint some expectations, both others and your own fantasies. When you act from truth, you cannot please everyone because not all demands are compatible with what is right. This is where courage becomes routine rather than heroic. You decline what violates your values. You accept effort where your principles require it. You tolerate misunderstanding rather than falsifying yourself for harmony. That tolerance stabilizes identity. Alignment also simplifies decision-making. Many people feel overwhelmed because they choose based on mood, pressure, or immediate reward. When truth is your reference point, options narrow productively. You evaluate choices by whether they move you toward or away from integrity. This reduces internal debate and wasted motion. Clarity replaces constant reconsideration. Order emerges not from control of everything, but from consistency and direction. Your environment gradually reshapes around aligned action. Relationships become more honest because you communicate more clearly. Work improves because you bring full presence instead of divided motive. Time feels more substantial because it is invested rather than escaped. Even rest becomes cleaner. It is recovery after honest effort, not avoidance disguised as relaxation. Inner conflict does not disappear, but it becomes more useful. Instead of vague guilt or anxiety, you experience specific signals that guide adjustment. You notice quickly when behavior drifts, and you correct course early. This ongoing calibration prevents large breakdowns. It is like maintaining balance while walking. Constant micro-corrections guided by awareness. Meaning grows from congruence between what you know, what you say, and what you do. When these three line up repeatedly, self-respect deepens. From self-respect comes steadiness. From steadiness comes the capacity to build and sustain a life that feels coherent rather than fragmented, directed rather than accidental, and grounded rather than performative. So walk forward with awareness in your steps and honesty in your choices. Let your words be measured, your actions intentional, and your courage quiet but unyielding. Do not wait for perfect certainty or universal approval. They are not the gates to a meaningful life. Stand where you are, choose what is true, and act on it daily. When fear appears, let it mark the doorway, not the dead end. When responsibility calls, answer it as proof of your inner strength. Build order within, and your outer world will begin to reflect it. Live in such a way that at the end of each day, you can meet your own conscience without turning away, and that alone will be your greatest victory.